The first thing Marcus Holt heard wasn't the wind. It was silence, the wrong kind, the kind that fills the space between two sounds and makes you realize something out there has stopped moving. He had spent 11 years in places where silence like that meant you needed to act before you understood why. Old habits don't loosen their grip easily. He set down the coffee mug, listened. Then it came. A low thud against the base of the cabin door. Not a knock. Not a branch. Something heavier and deliberate and exhausted. Marcus was already moving. The storm had been building since Tuesday. By Thursday night, it owned the San Juan Mountains the way only February can. Absolutely. Without negotiation. Snow packed against every surface facing north. The tree line had disappeared into white somewhere around noon. The road leading up to his property hadn't existed as a road for 2 days now. Just a suggestion of a path buried under 14 inches of new powder, flanked by pines bent low and trembling. Marcus had chosen this. That was the part people never understood when they asked why he left. He hadn't retreated. He had positioned. There's a difference, and it matters. After Walter Reed, after the third surgery, after the last night, he sat in a parking lot at 2 a.m. unable to make himself go inside his own apartment. He stopped pretending that the life everyone expected him to return to was something he could fit back into, so he didn't. He bought 40 acres in the mountains of southwestern Colorado. Built out the cabin himself over 2 summers, working slow, working deliberate, letting the physicality of it absorb the parts of him that still needed somewhere to go. The nearest town was Ridgeway, 40 minutes south, on a good road day. He had a generator, 3 months of provisions, a woodpile stacked 12 feet long, and no particular reason to be anywhere else. Some nights that felt like enough. Tonight had been one of the harder ones. Not for any reason he could name. Just the weight of the quiet pressing against the windows. He had been sitting with it. Just sitting, the way his VA therapist once told him to try, letting the feeling move through instead of fighting it. When the sound came, he opened the door expecting a branch, maybe a fox. She was pressed flat against the base of the porch, directly under the small overhang that kept the worst of the wind off the entrance. A border collie, black and white, medium-sized, maybe 4 years old. Her left front leg was tucked under her body at an angle that wasn't natural. She raised her head when the light hit her, and her eyes found his immediately. Dark, clear, and so alert it nearly stopped him cold. There was no confusion in that gaze. She had come here on purpose. Behind her, tucked against her belly with the single-minded desperation of the very small and very cold, were 3 puppies. 2 had managed to burrow deep enough into her fur to stay relatively still. The third was shaking hard enough that Marcus could see it from where he stood. He looked at the dog. She looked at him. "All right," he said. "Come on." Getting her inside took patience. She wouldn't let him lift her. The leg was bad enough that even the attempt made her pull back hard, a sharp sound escaping her before she could stop it. So he pulled the old sled from beside the porch, laid his heaviest wool blanket across it, and waited. She watched him set it up. Then, moving slowly, favoring the injured leg with a kind of focused determination he recognized, she stepped onto herself and lowered herself down. The puppies followed her, tumbling and righting themselves, finding her again immediately. He pulled the sled through the door. Inside, he set them close to the fire. Not too close. Close enough for warmth to reach them gradually. Hypothermia doesn't release in a rush. You bring the temperature up slow, or you make things worse. He kept the lights dim, moved without sudden gestures, and filled a shallow dish with water at room temperature. She drank without lifting her head fully, never taking her eyes entirely off the puppies. Marcus knelt a few feet away and studied the leg. No bone visible. The paw had swelling around the joint, suggesting a bad sprain or a hairline fracture, but the fur above it was matted with something dried and dark. An old injury, recently aggravated. She had been moving on it for a while. The fact that she was here at all said something about how hard she had pushed herself to get here. "Where'd you come from?" he asked, not expecting an answer, just filling the space. She looked at him over the rim of the water dish. He went to get the first aid supplies. He had no veterinary training. What he had was 11 years of field medicine applied to circumstances where waiting for a professional was not an option, a working knowledge of anatomy, and the kind of patience that comes from understanding that slow and right beats fast and careless every single time. He cleaned the wound with diluted antiseptic, worked carefully around the swelling, and wrapped the leg with enough support to keep it stable without cutting circulation. She let him do all of it, flinched twice. Didn't pull away. The puppies slept through most of it, piled together with the boneless certainty of young animals who have decided the crisis is over. By midnight, the fire was burning low. Marcus added 2 more logs and sat back in the chair nearest the hearth. He hadn't planned on sleeping. But the weight of the day and the warmth of the room and the sound of small animals breathing had a particular gravity to it, and at some point his eyes closed. He woke to her nose against his hand. It was still dark. The fire had burned down to coals. Outside the storm was still running, but the pitch had changed. Lower, less wild, the kind that means it's tired and winding down. She was standing beside the chair on 3 legs, watching the window. Not anxious, focused. Marcus followed her gaze. Nothing moved in the white dark outside. Just trees and snow and the faint pale light that comes before dawn even in a storm. He almost looked away. Then he saw it, a shape, about 40 yards out at the edge of the tree line. Too large for a deer. Too still for anything afraid. It wasn't moving toward the cabin. It wasn't moving at all. Just standing, barely visible through the snow, like something that had stopped mid-step and hadn't decided what to do next. He reached for his coat and flashlight without thinking. She made a sound, not a bark, something lower, somewhere between a whine and a word. He looked at her. She looked at the window, then at him, then the window again. "You know what that is," he said. He pulled on his boots. 40 yards in a February blizzard at 4 a.m. is farther than it sounds. The snow came to his knees in the open patches, and the wind had picked up again, a second gust pushing through from the northwest. He kept the flashlight angled low, following the beam, and moved toward where he had seen the shape. He almost missed it. The man had gone down between 2 ponderosa pines, half sheltered by the low branches, which had probably saved his life. He was wearing a Ranger issue coat and waterproof pants, but the coat was open, either pulled or torn, and his shirt beneath was soaked. Hypothermia had been working on him for long enough that when Marcus knelt and pressed 2 fingers to his neck, the pulse was slow and unsteady. His lips were gray, his eyes were closed. Marcus looked back toward the cabin, 40 yards, maybe 50 from where he was now. He looked at the Ranger. Late 40s, heavy build, 6 feet at least. He did the math without drama. "Okay," he said to nobody, "we're moving." Getting him back was not a clean operation. Marcus couldn't carry him over that terrain in those conditions without risking both of them. So he went back for the sled. The dog watched him go and return without moving from her spot by the fire, and went back out. Loading an unconscious 200-pound man onto a wooden sled in a blizzard, in the dark alone, is exactly as difficult as it sounds. Marcus did it with the same methodical focus he had learned to apply to every impossible task. Break it into pieces. Do the next piece. Don't look at the whole problem, just the next piece. He got him onto the sled, pulled him to the cabin, got him through the door. The dog moved back to give them space. Inside, he stripped the wet clothes, got the man into dry layers from his own supply, and set up a slow warming protocol. Blankets, warm water bottles wrapped in cloth at the core, no direct heat. He knew the signs. He knew what to watch for. He sat on the floor beside him and watched. Just before 5 in the morning, the Ranger opened his eyes. He stared at the ceiling, then at Marcus, then at the dog who had moved to sit 3 feet away and was watching him with that same clear, direct attention she had given Marcus at the door. "Is that your dog?" the Ranger asked. His voice came out, rough, scraped dry. "No," Marcus said. "She showed up tonight, probably led me." The Ranger looked at her for a long moment. "Her name's Opal," he said finally. "She's been missing since Tuesday." His name was Daniel Reyes. He had been a ranger with the San Juan National Forest for 19 years. He knew these mountains the way most people know their own neighborhoods, the long way, the wrong way, the way that only comes from decades of watching the same terrain change with every season. He had gone out Tuesday afternoon to check on a trail shelter that had been flagged for structural damage, and the storm had accelerated 6 hours faster than any model had predicted. His truck went into a drainage ditch on the service road. His radio had died somewhere in the first night. He had been moving toward the nearest structure he could remember. Marcus's cabin, visible from the ridge on clear days, for 36 hours. Opal had found him on the second night, half buried, having given up moving for a while. She had stayed with him through the following day, sharing heat, and when his condition had gotten bad enough that staying still was going to be the end of it, she had left him only when she was sure she knew where she was going. She had left him to get help. Marcus listened to all of this, sitting in the chair by the fire, watching the color come back slowly into the man's face. He looked at the dog. She was nursing the puppies now, calm and methodical, the crisis fully released from her posture. 11 years of training, enough operations to understand what it means when someone runs toward danger instead of away from it. The clarity required to act when everything is against you, when your body is failing and the cold is winning, and still make the right call. He had spent years around humans who had that quality. He had never expected to find it in a dog who weighed 40 pounds and had gotten here on a broken leg. By mid-morning, the storm had fully eased. Marcus reached Ridgeway by satellite phone, and a truck with chains made it up the road by early afternoon. Daniel Reyes was taken to the hospital in Montrose. Moderate hypothermia, treatable, full recovery expected. Opal and her puppies were cleared by a vet tech who drove up in the truck. The leg was a fracture, small and clean, already stable from the wrapping. 6 weeks and she'd be back to full. Daniel, from his hospital bed, asked if Marcus would keep Opal until he was back on his feet. Marcus said yes before he finished the question. That spring, the cabin was different, not louder. Opal wasn't a noisy dog, but fuller, somehow. She had a way of being present in a room that made the silence feel occupied instead of empty. She healed fast and moved through the property with a quiet authority, like she had always known where things were and had simply been waiting to get back to them. The puppies went to 3 separate families in Ridgeway. Marcus drove them down himself. He stayed for coffee at the last house, something he hadn't done with anyone in the town in the 2 years since he'd been there. On the drive back up the mountain, Opal rode in the passenger seat with her head angled toward the window, watching the tree line pass. Marcus had spent a long time believing that the thing he needed most from this place was its distance from everything else. The quiet. The space between him and the rest of the world, where nothing could reach him without warning. He hadn't considered that what came through the door that night hadn't come to take something from him. It had come because it had nowhere else to go. Because something in her, some compass built from need and instinct, and whatever it is that drives a broken, freezing animal to keep moving when stopping, would be easier. That compass had pointed here, to him. He drove the last mile up to the cabin without the radio on. The mountains were still and white and enormous all around him. And for the first time in longer than he could measure, the silence didn't feel like something pressing in. It felt like something settling.